Hey, what's going on, guys? You guys have tuned in to Rules for Rebels. It's Monday. I've been trying to make this video since Friday, and I keep getting like 15 minutes into it and then fucking up and starting over. You guys know I don't edit, so if I fuck up, I just start right on over. This is another one of those millennial articles. For whatever reason, they always tend to grab my attention, and they seem to intrigue you guys as well, as I notice these videos tend to get higher than average views as well as comments and interaction. Why do they grab my attention? Why do they grab our attention? I think, A, they affect us. They're talking about us since a lot of us are millennials. These articles always kind of touch on Gen Z as well. I kind of make fun of these articles a lot. You know, it seems like with this 24-hour news cycle we live in, whenever there's a slow news day, they come up with either some article shitting on millennials, and I guess this one isn't really shitting on millennials. It's kind of talking about how millennials have it hard. But, you know, these millennial articles, they tie into everything from like career in the workplace to society and culture, and even to politics. I figured we'd give this article a read, but something I said I was going to start doing is kind of summarizing these articles for people who don't feel like sitting through a 20-minute long video, as I tend to ramble. One of the most interesting points that this article touched on, and the article kind of talks about how millennials graduated into a bad economy, and that kind of slowed their early years in the workplace. And kind of how millennials own less real estate, own less stocks, etc., than way behind boomers, and substantially behind Gen X as well. One of the most interesting things about this article was they say that your first job out of college kind of sets the trends, sets the path for where your income's going to go. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Because pretty much when people hop job, you know, they say on average, people get a 2 or 3% raise per year, you know, cost of living raise. When you switch jobs, you tend to get, on average, a 15% raise. So if you're going to switch jobs, you're typically going to get more money. And think about this, you know, if you graduate college and your first job out of school is making 30 grand or 35 grand, and you wind up getting a 15% raise, you know, then you're up to, I don't feel like doing the math, but you're up to 43, and then you get another 15% raise and you're up to 50, you know. But imagine if you come out of college and you land a job making 60 grand a year, you know, you're just going to be able to jump higher quicker. And I think most people probably notice when you have job interviews or when you're applying for jobs, they'll often ask what your previous salary was. And if you were making 30, they're probably not going to give you 70. They're probably going to give you 40 or 50, right? Just because they know that they can get away with giving you less. So the article kind of talks about how your first job out of college kind of sets the path for where your income's going to be. And with millennials graduating into, a lot of millennials graduating into a horrible economy, a lot of millennials spend a couple years after college working retail or working jobs kind of outside of their career space. Oftentimes, the first years of your career are when you're really kind of starting to advance, and once you start hitting your late 20s or early 30s, you're in, you know, mid-level positions, supervisory positions. Your career is really starting to take off, and a lot of millennials, you know, through the vast majority of their 20s were working retail jobs, working jobs that are kind of beneath their skill sets and education. Because of the bad economy, a lot of boomers and Gen Xers were working jobs that were below them, which took jobs that would normally go to millennials. And because of all this, millennials lag behind in home ownership and owning stocks. And even though the economy has been booming for the past 10 years or so, in terms of stocks going through the roof, housing prices going up, which should kind of raise all ships. But millennials, if they're so burdened by student loans and also haven't really had a bunch of money early in their career, they haven't necessarily been owning homes or owning stocks and haven't been able to take advantage of all this. So hopefully, like, everybody's contributing to their 401k. If a company offers a 401k match, hopefully you're contributing the max that's going to be matched. But if you got $1,500 in student loan payments, I get how some people aren't doing that. So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's article. Let's just hop right into it. The article is titled, "Millennial Wealth is Still Lagging Behind Previous Generations at the Same Age." When it comes to owning real estate investments and consumer goods, millennials are far behind previous generations at the same or similar age. Millennials owned only 4.6% of total U.S. assets in the third quarter of 2019, the year when the middle of the generation was turning 30. According to a recent Federal Reserve data, that compares to 7.8% for Gen Xers at the same age in 2002 and 25% for baby boomers in 1990, when the median baby boomer age was just slightly older at 35. Let's see. The disparity in some ways reflects cultural changes, and to a larger extent, it underscores the costlier housing, growing student loan debt, and lower incomes among younger adults in the aftermath of the Great Recession. And one thing that's interesting about this, I just saw Haro pitch about this earlier today, but basically one of the problems, like, yeah, there's a ton of jobs, but I think the bigger problem is wage stagnation, right? Like, the real estate market's been booming in recent years. Housing prices are up, and up. A number of years back, I bought my first home. It was a shitty little townhome in not the greatest neighborhood, but I bought that home for, I think it was $86,000 after you factored in all the credits and everything. That house today, I would say conservatively, would sell for $160. If I was lucky, I might be able to get, I think the highest comparable I've seen recently was like $188. And so even though real estate prices have boomed and the cost of education has been skyrocketing as well, growing much faster than inflation, somebody coming out of school today probably isn't making that much more than I made coming out of school years back. Yet the cost of a home is almost double, right? Obviously, it's dependent on geographic area and things like that, but wages haven't gone up much, but the cost of everything else has. So I think that's kind of one of the things that's really fucking millennials, along with student loan debt and other issues. The article goes on to say the most obvious reason is that they came of working age during the financial crisis. Mark Zandia, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, told Yahoo Money, timing, they say, is everything, and they had poor timing. And here we can see a chart. Share of assets by U.S. generation. Let's see, silent and earlier. Average millennials. So what are we looking at here? So if we look at this chart towards the right, average millennial turned 30. The dark blue is going to be the silent generation. The lighter blue is going to be boomers. The teal is Gen X. And millennials are the green. And you can see how far millennials are lagging behind every other generation, specifically boomers, but substantially further behind Gen Xers as well. That chart says millennials owned only 4.6% of total U.S. assets in the third quarter of 2019, the year when the middle of the generation was turning 30, according to recent Federal Reserve data. A recession and its lingering effects. When the Great Recession began in 2007, the eldest millennials were graduating from college or just a few years into their careers. Unemployment soared during this time to as high as 10% in 2009, with the rate among young adults hitting 19.1%. That's huge. Salaries for jobs then, if one could be secured, were also subpar, and that has haunted millennials since. And this is the most interesting part in my mind. There's a lot of research that shows your lifetime earnings are dependent on your first paycheck, Zandy said. If your first paycheck fell short, then it's pretty hard to catch up. The Center for Economic and Policy Research, older chief economist Dean Baker noted that older generations, specifically boomers, began their working life straight out of high school and were able to accumulate more assets sooner compared with millennials who went to college and then grad school and only started working at 25. Those relatively new to the labor force don't have that many years behind them building wealth, Baker told Yahoo Money. Many millennials also chose to go back to graduate school, which created another financial burden later in life, student loans. The youngest generation who went to college later also borrowed more overall because education costs skyrocketed and their parents' savings has been eroded during the recession. So the cost of education is going fucking nuts. Like even since I've graduated college, the school that I went to here in Illinois, I don't want to throw out a number because I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's gone up substantially. And then, not that everybody has the help of their parents paying for college, but people whose parents may have been willing to help out, well, they got hammered by the Great Recession, so they didn't have that help, so they've taken on more student loan debt. That's how student loan debt became a defining factor for the generation. The biggest thing, in my view, depressing wealth is student loan debt, Baker said, and that's obviously a bigger burden than Gen X and baby boomers felt. Housing appreciation doesn't help, and this is what we talked about, how housing and stocks have gone through the roof, but if you don't own housing or stocks, it doesn't really benefit you. One of the biggest assets that Americans own is their homes. There too, millennials lag behind previous generations. Millennials own 4% of all U.S. real estate at the end of the year, compared with 12.9% for Gen X when they were the same age in 2002. And boomers held about 32% in 1990, when the middle of the generation was around 35. So obviously, boomers are 5 years older than the millennials and Gen Xers were in this survey. Reason being, they didn't have data for when boomers were 30. Part of the decline reflects millennials marrying later in life. The median age in 2019 for marriage was 28 for women and 29.8 for men, up 23.8% for women and 26.2% for men in 1989. Millennials are starting families at a later stage in their life, and homeownership generally doesn't happen until you start a family, Zandy said. I think that's really untrue. Like, I do think there's some truth to that, but if you are a young person, the only reason not to buy a home, home ownership is a choice, right? Like, home ownership isn't always better than renting, but if you are somebody who plans on owning a home, I wouldn't necessarily wait. One of the reasons they say to wait on buying a home is when you're young and you're not tied down by family and kids. If a position opens up across the country, if there's a transfer opportunity within your company, yeah, it can be beneficial to not have a lot of baggage and be able to take that. But if you plan on staying in the area that you're in for 5 or 10 years, you might as well buy a home. That's one of the things that really put me ahead when I was younger. I did the whole house hacking thing. I bought a house. I moved 2 buddies in with me. I think that's cool to do at a young age, because back, when you're at a younger age, most people have roommates. It's much more socially acceptable to have roommates. I had a bunch of buddies that lived with me. They pretty much paid my entire mortgage. All I had to pay for was utilities and cable. So I essentially got to live for free, and all that extra money I either doubled down on my mortgage or put into investments, and some of that I used to start my first business. So I'm a huge fan of house hacking. I see more younger people having an interest in that and getting involved with that, which is cool. The article goes on to say, if you compare 2019 to 1989, you'll get that house prices are 20% higher adjusted for inflation, and you'll need a 20% larger down payment. And that's kind of what we're talking about, how housing and education are growing much faster than inflation and far faster than wages as well. So even though nobody's making any more money, everything's costing them more money, and that's why it's so tough. Slower to invest, millennials also hold a smaller portion of all investments in stocks and mutual funds. In 2002, baby boomers in their mid-30s held almost 38.6% in corporate equity and mutual fund investments, but in 2019, millennials of the same age controlled just 1.6%. That's like, what's that, like 37% higher of the investing pie, not including retirement funds. Zandy said millennials may be avoiding investing as much as their parents because they've been scared by the financial crisis, which sunk the stock market. But Baker said it's simpler than that. I think it's more millennials just don't have the wealth to invest. I thought this article had comments. Yahoo normally does. Oh, you know what? They must have turned off the... Oh, you know, that's a Google AMP. Let's see what some people's reactions are to this. Now, I'd love to kind of hear your guys' thoughts on this as well, so drop a comment down below. I'm 33 and grew up as a child of parents who immigrated from India. Based on my experience, there's a large difference in the mentality and culture of money in America versus other countries. The common Indian mentality is I make 20, how can I save 15? Well, the American mentality is I make 20, but I spend 25 on a credit card. Not everybody is like that, but I think there's a lot of truth to that. He's kind of long-winded, so we won't read him. Yeah, these are long ones, so people are actually obviously passionate about these subjects. Looking for shorter ones. Truth and education costs should be law. If you try to buy a house or car, the lender has to tell you the total cost of the loan. Colleges should have to tell you the same thing along with their placement rate for that major and the average salary their graduates make upon being hired in an industry. There would be a lot less student loan debt. So, that's another thing. That's one thing I meant to kind of touch on at the beginning of this video. I feel bad for millennials, myself included, because when we were in high school, the message drilled into our heads was you have to go to college, you have to go to college, you have to go to college. If you want to have a good life, you have to go to college. No, don't go to trade school. No, don't get a certificate in something. Go to college. Doesn't matter what you go for. Go for basket weaving, go for leisure studies, go for feminist studies. Just go to college and get that piece of paper because you'll have a happy life. And I think most of us realize that's not true. There are a lot of worthless degrees. There's an inflation on education, and college degrees aren't necessarily worth it anymore. You may not wind up earning that much more over your career. Plus, you're going to have tens, if not even hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. But still to this day, I see people who they're going to college to get a history major, but they don't plan on teaching. I think teaching's an excellent field to go into. It's not for everybody, But like, don't get a history major if you don't plan on teaching, because you're going to have a hard time getting a job and a hard time making money. Also, don't go to a private school and spend $80,000 or $120,000 getting a degree to be a third grade teacher, because third grade teachers just aren't going to make enough money for that to be worthwhile, to see an ROI on it. In most cases, they're down south, and a lot of areas teachers don't make very much. In my school district, I got a couple cousins who teach in my district, and I also see the property taxes. In my district, you got preschool teachers and gym teachers making upwards of $130,000 with a $23,000 benefits package, who work 9 months out of the year, plus get a lot of holidays off. So, I think it's important to know what the salary expectation is for the career you're going into, as well as what it is for your area, because you also have teachers in South Carolina and other states who are making like $26,000 a year starting out. But at this point, I'm just rambling. I'll link to this article down below if you guys want to give it a read. A lot of comments. People have a lot of stuff to say. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Drop a comment, subscribe if you're not subscribed, and I'll catch you on the next video. Later, guys.